first off, the allopaths said they were materia medica crazed, that their focus was materia medica instead of dealing with all the new exciting stuff, things like bacteriology and pathology. The eclectics were extremely slow to accept things like bacteriology. They were still arguing in 1910 whether Pasteur was even, had any validity to his theories. Also, with the changing of the centuries, it made it seem like what they were practicing was sort of old medicine, because by 1890s you start having the discoveries coming out of Germany with the aniline coal tar dyes, and you start having this whole idea that medicine and health is going to come from the laboratory, and that's sort of new and exciting. And what they were doing is considered old-fashioned. Also, the eclectics, primarily their patient base was sort of working class people and rural people. And of course, you now have people more and more moving to the cities, and many of the eclectics are really serving rather rural populations. And then again, you then have, by World War I, you have the introduction of sulfa drugs. And one of the other things that really destroyed eclectic medicine was the Flexner Report. And the Flexner Report was published, I think it was by Carnegie, I think, actually paid for it.
Well, Abraham Flexner started as a schoolmaster in Louisville. He had been responsible there for starting his own school, which was a sort of preparatory for college. He won national recognition for his innovative ideas. Corresponded with John Dewey, corresponded with a lot of well-known American innovators in education, and was tapped by the Carnegie Foundation to look into American medical education. Well, medical education in the United States and in Canada. He himself was educated in Germany and brought with him many of the biases of that educational system, biases that were held by Charles Eliot and William Pepper and others, leaders in American education at the time. And remember, too, that when you're looking at American medical doctors, between the time of the Civil War and 1914, the First World War, some 15,000 American men and women, despairing of American medical education, went to Germany during that time to finish off their studies. That's a very telling statement about the quality of American medical education at the time. So Flexner makes this study. He actually visits, and again, let me back up. This is part of what we would call the progressive era in America. His book was polemical, certainly. It was a muckraker book, if you want to call it that. It raised eyebrows because it was very. It saw the worst in medical education. Now, what did he see? Well, first of all, he visited every medical school in the United States and Canada, and that was all 155 of them. And that included regular schools, homeopathic schools, eclectic schools, and physiomedical schools. And what he had to say for all of them was pretty damning. For example, 83 out of those 155 medical schools only required a grammar school education for admittance. Some 30 schools required a high school education or its equivalency, and then there were just a handful that required either 1 or 2 years of college. So he's walking into something that was ripe for reform. And what he saw simply confirmed that.
The Flexner Report was almost the final hammer blow, not quite. It was caused some serious damage. It actually began earlier there in the 20th century. The first 5 years of the 1900s, the American Medical Association started to try and kind of undermine the political power of some of these irregular schools by offering admission into the American Medical Association to irregular practitioners like eclectics or physiomedicalists if they would abandon their sectarian identity. And there were tremendous social advantages to being recognized as members of the AMA, and also financial advantages as well. So, and that was a technique that was later applied in both, I think, the 1960s, I know specifically in Kansas, and later in other states too, osteopathic doctors too, where they were given medical degrees if they would abandon their osteopathic identity and practice. So some of these kind of devious political techniques were used to weaken the medical profession. Another thing that happened was some of these eclectic medical schools, they were privately funded. They were controlled by stockholders. They were, money-making institutions, and yet the only income was from student tuition. So a lot of times to clear a profit, some of the facilities weren't upgraded, and a lot of things were, in terms of the physical plant, maybe relatively poor quality compared, especially with medical schools, again, that were associated with academic institutions, state universities and such. And so the other point was, with eclectic medical practice, was a strong emphasis on clinical and bedside practice, where the education was seen to be didactic in the classroom. It was basically lecturing and instruction, and then observing the treatment of patients, either in the home or in the office. While in regular medical schools about this time, there was a transition, strong influence from German medicine of laboratory research and scientific study, and starting to apply scientific principles to the practice of medicine. Had to do a lot with microscopy and the discovery and popularization by Pasteur and others of the influence of bacteria on illness and so on and so forth. So there was a transition in medicine with a renewed emphasis on evidence-based medicine that had a lot to do with laboratory research, whereas eclectic medical practice remained more empirical and clinical, based on clinical observation. There was a plethora of medical schools in the country, and I think one of the ulterior motive behind this study was to try and eliminate some of the riffraff, whatever its affiliation, just to reduce the number of doctors and look more for quantity in practitioners than quantity. And they succeeded in doing that by identifying practices, curriculum, and facilities that were substandard. And unfortunately, eclectic medical schools fell into that category. Some of them had already succumbed to financial difficulties and were simply, their stock was bought out by medical doctors who then transformed them into regular medical schools. That happened, for example, shortly after the Flexner Report with Bennett Medical College in Chicago, where Ellingwood had been an instructor. So the only one to really survive long after the Flexner Report was made public in 1910, how that report was applied was that the American Medical Association had what they called a Council of Medical Education, which graded the schools based largely on the criteria developed by Flexner. And they were graded A, B, or C. They may have had a D, but basically anything that wasn't considered a grade A school, the medical boards would very often not allow graduates of that school to sit for medical licensure in that state. Again, in some states, eclectics had their own medical boards, so they were able to maintain licensure in spite of this this new AMA policy. But ultimately what happened at the time of the Flexner Report, there were about a half a dozen of the eclectic schools still in existence, and by 1918 it had been reduced to the one school which had been Eclectic Medical Institute. It had upgraded its facilities and changed its name to the Eclectic Medical College about 1910, I think maybe 1908. It was right around that same time. They had the highest score of all the eclectic schools as a grade B school, and so they were still able to attract some students because they could get licensed in certain states and had a generally superior education in comparison with the other sectarian schools. But a lot of the homeopathic colleges closed. The last one that still exists today, the Hahnemann Medical School in Philadelphia, eventually lost its homeopathic curriculum and was taken over by conventional medicine. So that was kind of the results of the Flexner Report, was to establish standards which couldn't be met by schools whose emphasis was not on laboratory research, whose emphasis was on clinical practice, physical diagnostic or symptomatic assessment, and prescribing. And so that was the basis on which eclectics and homeopaths were deemed inferior by AMA Council on Education that graded schools for qualifying for sitting for medical boards. So by 1920, the Eclectic Medical Institute was starting to diminish in its student population, and ultimately what happened was that students who couldn't gain admission to other medical schools would then apply to some of the less quality educational programs, the grade B schools. So the Eclectic Medical Institute started attracting students who were not so much interested in eclectic medicine as in a medical degree. And ultimately, by about 1928, they stopped admitting students for 4 years, graduated a class in 32, renovated the school, introduced a new class, I think it was in about 34, but after John Uri Lloyd, who had been subsidizing a lot of the improvements in the school personally, died in 1936, and the college closed in 38 or 39. So with the passing of John Uri Lloyd and his support, and a lot of the old-time practitioners passing, a loss of financial support, a loss of the was it esprit de corps, the true belief in eclectic medicine.
The 1830s and 1915, you're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 or more sectarian colleges established in the United States. You're going to have over 450 societies created in that time, and over 550 journals focused around alternative medicine. That is an enormous amount. If you include then the other fringe groups in the alternative medicine, aside from those main ones that I talk about, you're over 200 colleges, you're over 500 societies, and you're over 600 journals. That's not a small amount. Yet not too many people know that. And I think part of my role as a historian, when I talk to medical students, is to indicate to them that mainstream medicine, or what they called orthodox medicine, for a large part of American history, was not the be-all, end-all. It competed with any number of other schools for the attention of the American family. And the American family was more than willing to give credence to these other groups. And if, again, you followed the dictum of Adam Smith and letting the market play itself out, they were very successful until the late 19th century in making their mark, making their imprint on American history.
To me, the eclectic experiment, which starts in 1825, and let's say it pretty much ends by 1935 or 1940. So we have a little over 100 years. Chinese medicine is several thousand years old. Ayurvedic medicine is older than that. And these things are still evolving. And one of the things that I hope to be able to do, along with some of the other wonderful people who have really looked into the eclectics, is not just to sit there and say, okay, this is their legacy. It's not a finished thing. And so the idea is that we learn the eclectic system of medicine. We start using it again. Now, maybe we're not going to learn it entirely because, as I said, some of those toxic remedies people are less likely to use today. We can't get acetate, aconite, acetate, belladonna, and if those herbs are toxic enough, without knowing exactly how much you're getting per drop, they can be problematic. But much of what they've left us is a rich heritage, which I think once we learn, we can then start moving it forward again. There are many herbs that we have access today, Ayurvedic herbs, Chinese herbs, European herbs, the eclectics never used. But that doesn't mean we can't understand and learn their specific indications. So for instance, one of my, an herb I use quite a bit, Centella asiatica, gotu kola. The black letter symptoms, even though the eclectics didn't use it, one of the specific indications for gotu kola is, again, skin or fascia or muscle tissue that is red, hot, and inflamed. So I almost always use it with sarsaparilla. The two together I find work better than any one by itself. And so we can take their ideas and we can continue to utilize them. And one of the beauties of, I think, what's now current American herbal practice is it's a melting pot. Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine, eclectic medicine, physiomedicalism, Thompsonian medicine, wise woman tradition, Native American traditions, and in a sense, all these are coming together, and I can almost see that as the new eclecticism. You know, taking it from every place, but taking it from very strong traditions, and not totally buying into the Western scientific model is the only valid way of doing herbal practice, because the vast history of herbal practice is experiential. I'm not against, you know, using tests and studies to see if things have validity, but at the same time, I think that we need to honor both our ancestors and take what they have given us, that's our heritage, and continue it, to grow it, to make it stronger, to make it better. And I think that's one of the beauties of eclecticism and specific medication, is that they left us something that we can take and continue to use and continue to expand.
We don't have role models, clinical role models. We're all coming out of a Western medical experience. You know, we all went to doctors, or we go to doctors, and they're not herbalists. And part of the herbalism is not just knowing the medicine and the herbs, it's a different attitude to life. It's an attitude that affirms greenness, affirms joy and magic, even though you're going to use alkaloids and you're going to use all the technical stuff. There's no drive to reduce the patient to the disease name and the box we put into in the system. The eclectics spontaneously did that holistic stuff, though they didn't call it holistic. You've got to spend time learning how they speak and what their sort of written voice was like. But once you get that, their writings drip with holism. That's the most important contribution for us. And then, you know, real solid, deep, profound information about the herbs, which blows most herbalists away when they first see a monograph out of King's. You know, who knew there was that much to know about nettles? There's one other way in which the eclectics are really important now. The affirmation that there were American herbalists, there was an American tradition, there still can be an American tradition. On the West Coast here, many people drawn to herbalism think they're being drawn to Chinese herbalism because that's the only herbalism they've heard about. All the stuff going on in the health food stores. They just didn't know there was an American tradition. This country has an incredibly short historical memory. So it's an affirmation of our roots. You know, there are lots of people affirming the old-time wise women herbalists of the Middle Ages. Yes, yes, we should. And the shaman, yes. But these strange white middle-class semi-intellectuals from the 19th century were the primary American expression of the healing miracle of the green. It's difficult to marry Hildegard's concept of viriditas, the healing power of the green, with Ellingwood's statements about cures for masturbation. But both people are really good expressions in their culture of the healing power of the green. Just Victorians were strange people. It's just the way it was. So I'm very thankful that the physiomedicals came to England, otherwise I wouldn't be a herbalist, and really thankful that the FDA and the AMA could not wipe clean the North American memory of what they call medical cults.